now, save 50 to 70% off at Banana Republic factory stores and online. And 60% off absolutely everything at Gap factory stores. Save even more with 40% off clearance at Gap factory stores. And at Banana Republic factory, sweaters start at $19.99 and scarves start at $9.99. Hurry! Search our store locator for your nearest Gap factory and Banana Republic factory store, or shop us online.
Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Nonprofit U, a forum where nonprofit stakeholders can share lessons learned and discuss the latest developments in the industry. My name is Valerie Leonard, your host. I'm a consultant to nonprofits specializing in community and organizational development. I work with nonprofit organizations to help them make stronger impacts to their clients and communities. You can find Nonprofit U on Facebook and Twitter. I encourage you to follow us and to comment the Chicago way, early and often. Use the hashtags NonprofitU or the People's TIF. This is the best way to make our community grow and thrive. You can also leave comments on blogtalkradio.com/nonprofit_U. The chat room is open and you can post comments and questions. In order to use the chat room, you must have a listener-only account. You'll find a link to open the account on the page for this episode. You can also email me questions at consulting@valerief.leonard.com. We'll be taking questions by phone and from our chat room at about the 20-minute mark or so. The call-in number is area code 347-884-8121. Today's episode is the People's TIF. We will explain what TIFs are, look at the way TIFs have been used traditionally in Chicago, and we'll show you ways that they can be used to better benefit the people who live in communities undergoing change. Again, we encourage you to call in with questions at about the 20-minute mark. You can start posting in the chat room and emailing questions now. Again, my email address is consulting@valeriefleonard.com. If you want to participate in the live chat, you must open an account, and the link is found on the episode page. The call-in number is area code 347-884-8121. Nonprofit and community development professionals, as well as those who live in TIF districts, are especially encouraged to call in and share your stories and strategies. Today's guests are Catalina Gaete and Cecile Carroll DeMello. They're co-directors of Blocks Together. Blocks Together, or BT as we call them, is a membership-based community organizing group in the West Humboldt Park community. They're on the west side of Chicago. West side? I couldn't help myself, y'all. Since 1995, BT has empowered residents to work together for systematic changes that bring concrete improvement to their lives. BT tackles social justice issues relating to education, housing, economic justice, and the criminalization of our youth. Some of their most notable work includes participating on the Chicago Educational Facilities Task Force. They advocate for equity and transparency around school facilities, closures, and boundaries. They have also worked with local school councils and community-based organizations around the city on issues surrounding school utilization and closures, advocacy around tax reform, and equitable school funding and supporting a referendum for an elected school board. Blocks Together began their work on TIFs in earnest in 2008 when they wanted to better understand the relationship between TIFs and school funding and school closures. We'll start with our first guest, Catalina Gaete, or Carroll as we like to call her. Carroll, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started with Blocks Together?
Yes, good afternoon, Carroll. I am a popular educator who was raised in little villages and has been organizing around issues of economic justice, education, and human rights for about 20 years. And currently I am the co-director at Blocks Together. Have been here for 8 years and started out as the housing organizer.
Wow, 20 years. That's really, really hard to believe. Cecile, before we get started on our question, can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. I started at Blocks Together in 2008 as an education parent organizer. I work a lot with the parents here in the community through using a lot of leadership development to help identify different issues that are facing some of our public schools and work on ways with our parents to resolve them. We've done a lot of advocacy work around school actions, showing the issues around utilization and different facility issues and inequitable resources in some of our local schools. I'm also a mom. I have two children, and they're both CPS students.
Oh, awesome, awesome. And before we get started on our discussion about the work that Blocks Together has done around TIFs, can you give us a sense for what TIFs are, how they've been used in Chicago, and specifically in the 24th Ward?
Sure. So tax increment financing is an economic development tool that freezes property tax dollars in a designated community that is usually designated by the City of Chicago and the Department of Planning. The designation of this community is usually done through the characteristics of a community being blighted or lack of economic development. And the TIF is supposed to be used to be able to spur development in that community. The increment after the TIF has been designated goes into a separate COFR, and that COFR is then used for the development projects. What happens then is the increment that would have went to the taxing bodies no longer goes to those taxing bodies after the designation. And the designation is usually for about 22 years unless it's expanded by the city council. A lot of critiques around the critiques around TIF is that a lot of our taxing bodies are struggling right now, and they're not getting a lot of this increment that has been developed in the years and decades that a TIF has existed, right? So we have a lot of issues right now with our Chicago public schools, and they're losing revenue because of the freeze in the property taxes, right? So we also see a lot of critiques around the lack of direct benefit and little transparency and community representation over the development projects that are then created by the TIF. There's a lot of larger corporations that take advantage of the TIFs, and they don't always have the direct need in mind of residents, right? In the Chicago Central Park TIF district, where we've been working in the 27th Ward, a lot of the funds have gone to the building of the new Westinghouse High School and a lot of affordable housing projects. So where they have been used for things that have somewhat benefited the community, a lot of things that folks in the neighborhood wanted to see, like job training and job development, haven't necessarily happened, and that's where a lot of our work has been focused on in the last year or two.
Oh, okay, great. So, Carroll, Blocks Together is the first group to successfully advocate for the use of TIF funds for micro-lending. How in the world did you guys pull that off, and how did this idea come about?
Well, the idea came from one of our board members, which is Miss Lois Crawford. Miss Lois Crawford, she's a business owner on the West Side for over 40 years. She's a beautician. And through many of the conversations she had with the young men out in the corner, she believed that if the residents were giving access to funds to begin their businesses, it would drastically bring down some of the criminal activities happening in our neighborhoods. What she said the biggest problem was that our neighborhood lacked resources and support for emerging and startup businesses. So the idea of Project Yes came to be. Project Yes stands for Your Economic Support, and we were really wanted to focus on yes because a lot of the people we're working with have heard no. You know, we don't have the right credit, we don't have the right amount of money, we don't have the business lingo, right? And there's currently the mayor has really prided himself, right, in starting the Chicago Microlending Institute, the CMI, which is supposed to support all these small and emerging businesses. However, this was not really helping our community. In Inglewood, it's the Chicago Neighborhood Initiative and Acción. Both are microlending community-based programs that help and support small businesses. However, it is almost impossible for somebody with a little startup money or a great credit history to be able to access these small microlending programs designed by the city. You have to have 125% collateral up front or 50% of what you're borrowing as collateral. I received one of these microlending programs, and we had to have 4 co-signers. You had to put up either personal, vehicles, homes, business assets. So it's also very intimidating for somebody that is thinking about putting something together and doesn't have all the information. So that's how we came about thinking that we really needed something in the neighborhood, some investment in the neighborhood to really begin to reduce some of the criminal activities and therefore reduce some of the crime and violence in our community. We believe that if you invest in our community, some of these it will help diminish some of these other problems. So that's where the idea came. So we were, pardon?
A documentation loan as well?
Yes.
No? Okay.
I'm sorry, Valerie, I can't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a low documentation loan process. You don't need a whole heck of a lot of paperwork, or
right.
is the paperwork something that BT takes on?
No, we're still, the way we're designing this program is also making sure that the business loan could be something from $50 if you're interested in starting an Avon, or up to $50,000 if you want to expand. But it's also making sure that they receive the support, mentorship, and know-how to be able to sustain their business. And we also wanted to be a low interest rate, so we were looking at 2% interest rate to return.
Great.
So it's basically making sure that it's based on their need and that they're also being supported, because we know a lot of the small business fail because they're not receiving the support needed to succeed. And we're currently still in the negotiating process of and making sure that we receive these TIF dollars to finance the microlending program.
Wow, that's awesome. You guys have done a great job. And will these loans be available only in Humboldt Park for now, or will it be citywide once they get done?
For right now, we're focusing in the West Humboldt Park community, especially in residents who reside within the Chicago Central Park TIF.
Okay, great. Okay, so Cecile, can you tell us how Blocks Together advocacy around TIF intersects around education committees work? And when I say the education committee, I'm talking about, Blocks Together. Can you tell us how it intersects between education and the school funding and school closure issues? What were some of the lessons learned as they relate to education advocacy? And do you think a TIF surplus should have been declared to cover pension costs to avoid laying off 1,400 workers, as CPS just did just last week? And when I say CPS, I'm talking about the Chicago public school system.
Sure. Thanks, Valerie. So the work that we've done in the Education Committee here at Blocks Together, parents began to work around some of the facility conditions of our local schools. One of our largest elementary schools in West Humboldt Park hadn't seen any facility investment in over 15 years. So with that, we started to do a lot of participatory action research and trying to find out where was facility funds being spent. And with that, a story then began to unfold in front of our eyes, where we saw that charter schools and schools that were a little bit more politically affluent were getting facility funds for things that were not as necessary as some of the facility condition issues that were happening in some of our local schools. So with that, we also found out that they were getting these funds from not only the capital budget of CPS, but they were getting some of these funds from local TIF dollars. And so some of our schools were like, well, why can't we get access to those TIF dollars for our critical condition needs? And it's through that we began to advocate around changing how Chicago Public Schools does their capital budget capital budget process. So right now we passed legislation in fall 2011 called Senate Bill 100. And with that bill, the district is now mandated to do a 5-year capital improvement plan, and is also mandated to do a facility plan, which they just did in fall 2013, that shows the conditions of buildings and also, where the financing and the support is going to go to fix the buildings that are in the 5-year capital plan, so parents can now look at the 5-year capital plan and the facility plan and see, wait a minute, does my school need to get these funds more immediately than some of the schools that are being addressed now? In addition, we mandated that the district has to do 2-year facility assessments for schools. Some of our schools hadn't had updated facility assessments in 6-7 years. So now parents are going to be able to get real-time facility assessments. Well, not real-time, but closer facility assessments, as well as be able to see the amount of repairs that are needed for each school, and then see where the district is planning on spending money for the next 5 years. So it's been very important for us to look at where the money was going and be able to advocate that our schools are just as important as other schools in the community. As far as the TIF surplus question, a lot of the TIFs in communities like West Humboldt Park, those funds could be used for the necessary economic development that a lot of our communities need. And some of this money is just there and hasn't been allocated. So I go back and forth about should all the surplus just go there, or should some of these communities that are really in need be able to utilize those dollars. Also, Chicago Public Schools has to figure out some more sustainable revenue and not just look for Band-Aid funding mechanisms, but be able to create long-term revenue strategies.
Oh, excellent. And thank you guys for all of that advocacy. You didn't mention that you guys played a very powerful role in making sure that the task force was actually created in Springfield, and we can't thank you enough for the work that you do and the accountability that you have shown the community. So, Carroll, I understand that BT's Housing Committee began participatory action research around school closures and intersection with TIF dollars back in 2008. From there, the Housing Committee created a long-term agenda to bring more transparency and direct benefit from the local TIF and organized the first town hall meeting around the Chicago Central Park TIF. Can you tell us more about how the Housing Committee went about developing this agenda and what has been accomplished to date?
Yes. As you mentioned at the beginning, Blocks Together is a membership organization. So our members set our campaign goals and focus around in January. But also at that time, January was also the time CPS would publish its dreaded list of schools due to turnaround or for closing. So it was at one of our first meetings that the Housing Committee's question they had was, well, what's going on with all these school closings? Where are our tax going? Isn't our tax dollars supposed to be paying for the schools? So that was the one question that has guided our campaign to date. Like, where are our tax dollars going? What are they funding? So after really focusing about 6 months in really learning about the TIF, you were actually one of the people that helped us, and you were one of our guests in the first town hall meeting, along with Commissioner Quigley, was to really learn about what its functions, what its purpose, and what was the impact in our community. If they kept on telling us the CPS was broke, and our property taxes kept on going up, so where were our tax dollars going? And through looking at the property taxes, we saw this thing TIF. So that was the one thing that we said we needed to learn about and find out what was going on. So the more, like I said, we kicked off our campaign with doing the town hall, where yourself and Commissioner Quigley came and helped really spark more interest around learning more about what was really happening with the TIF and how could communities really take control over them. The more we learned, the more space our community gained. So we really focused our campaign goals around 3 areas, around having more transparency, accountability, and ensure direct benefit for the community. So some of the things that we did around to ensure more transparency was design the annual State of the TIF, which is basically around the annual report that comes out in July, around just kind of doing all the accounting for the spending, who received money, where did the money go. So every year we had the aldermen and people from the Department of Planning come out and inform the community around the spending for the previous year. This also had people saying, okay, now we know how the money is being spent, but we also want to be able to hold elected officials accountable and actually have a say on how our money is being invested. As we are investors to this fund, but we were not seeing a return on our investment, we reorganized the TIF Advisory Council for the Chicago Central Park TIF, which main focus is to educate the community, also survey the community, and give recommendations to the aldermen on how some of the TIF money should be spent. Working really around the transparency and accountability goals, we still saw that our community was not benefiting from the TIF. There was no direct benefit. After we researched and looked and studied the 10-year status report, we saw that employment was very minimal. That was pre- and post-construction employment was very minimal. The people that were actually accessing some of the affordable housing units built in the neighborhood was also very minimal, and also what was coined affordable did not translate into affordability for a lot of the residents living within the Chicago Central Park TIF. That's why we decided that in order to have direct benefit, we needed to have direct control over TIF dollars, which came to using participatory budgeting methodology to allocate TIF dollars.
Oh, okay, awesome. So, Cecile, BT staff and members started working with the Participatory Budgeting Project and the University of Illinois at Chicago, or what we would call UIC, the Great Cities Institute, to learn how to use PB in the community back in 2013. Through your advocacy, Alderman Walter Burnett committed to using the $2 million in TIF funds from a canceled development project to the PB process. How in the world did you guys pull that one off?
So the short answer is we just asked. We had a meeting where we discussed. Yep. We had a meeting with the alderman, me and some of the residents, and we laid out how we wanted it to go. He had already expressed interest in being able to have the community decide how those $2 million should be spent, and so we came with our proposal. But first, the first thing we did, though, and this preceded our meeting with him, was we did a lot of research on how PB is used in other low-income communities. So some of us had visited New York City and went to other organizations and neighborhoods that are similar to ours that use PB, just in order to really see how a community like ours would be able to implement it. From that research, created our own kind of process. And then we also, we already had a working relationship with Alderman Burnett that was centered around accountability and community-led change. So he expects that type of work from Blocks Together, while we expect accountability for the decisions he makes that impacts our community. So we have a relationship around respect, and he's not a friend and he's not an enemy. He's an elected official that we like to make sure understands that when we approach him, we're approaching him because the community is seeking to do this work and that these are his constituents. And so I think that made it easier for us just to be able to ask.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Well, we've got one call on the phone. I'm going to cut this off for just a minute and have our caller ask a question. I believe that this is Isaac Lewis on the line. Isaac, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Isaac, did you have a question before we move on with the interview?
Not at this point. I had got on late. But what I wanted to know, how could nonprofits take more advantage of the TIFs now?
Okay. Either Cecile. Yeah, they can answer that, and then we'll move on with our interview.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, actually, within the Chicago Central Park TIF, it's been the nonprofits that have benefited the most. It could be because they could be used for capital projects for affordable housing. So within the Chicago Central Park TIF, people that have received money have been Bickerdike. It's been Night Ministry. Also, there's a veterans, the Children's Place. So they're using to build facilities and build capital improvement. There's also the West Humboldt Park Development Council has used it for their Healthy Communities Initiative. So there have been different ways in which nonprofits have actually accessed TIF dollars. The problem we found is that the community have not had that direct access and that direct benefit from accessing those tax dollars, because sometimes community organizations receiving the TIF dollars doesn't necessarily translate in the community residents benefiting from that money. And that's been our experience. Great point,
great point. Okay, so Carroll, back in 2009, BT members worked on a campaign to use the Chicago Central Park TIF funds to bring an affordable housing development to the community. There was a developer that you approached, and you wanted to develop a community benefit agreement for the project. In fact, you drafted the agreement, but the developer refused to sign. Can you tell us what was in the community benefit agreement, how it was developed, and why the developer refused to sign it?
This is a perfect segue to what I was saying previously. This was a community development corporation, and they had been working with some of the members here in the West Humboldt Park community. And as the project began, they needed to have buy-in in the West Humboldt Park community because they were not within West Humboldt Park. So they used a lot of the black residents to legitimize their presence in West Humboldt Park and receive the necessary welcome and approval right from its residents and the aldermen. However, as they received the tax credits, the zoning, and the approval, the leaders, as you may, were no longer needed, or so that's what was perceived by the development corporation. So they didn't really need them anymore to make those decisions that they were been promised in the beginning, that they would be partners, that they would have a say in the design, that they would have a say in hiring pre- and post-construction, that they would have a say in choosing the general contractor, all that. But when the time came to do all that, the people were pushed aside. That's when I was approached by some of the members to work with them in designing a binding community benefit agreement. We didn't want an MOU. We wanted something binding with teeth. So that's how we began to design the community benefit agreement. It was just basically by visioning what is it that we wanted to what benefit do we want for our community based on this development that was going to also be receiving public dollars. So basically, the benefit agreement was asking to secure a percentage of pre- and post jobs, with the highest percentage going to people that had been involved with the justice system or had criminal records, that people had actually access to training, because a lot of the times they say we want employment, but then they come back and saying, well, there is not a prepared workforce, right? So that's how they can get around it. So we said, no, we want the employment, and we want people to be prepared to be able to be employed. So we were also asking that a certain percentage of money was also donated to educational programs in the neighborhood, and that the members of KUFA, which is now Westside United, be partners in the development. However, after a year of going back and forth, there was no agreement made. So the alderman said if there was no agreement, then the project would be stopped. That's what happened. So the money that had been secured, the $2 million that had been secured for this affordable housing development, which actually only 3 of the units were going to be affordable to our residents, was stopped. So that's how the $2 million was there.
Oh, great.
So even though we didn't sign the community benefit agreement, it was also a message that was sent. You can't just come into our community, make false promises, and benefit financially from us, and then we're set on the side.
For-profit or nonprofit, huh?
Right, regardless. So that's sometimes that nonprofit or for-profit. We also have to be vigilant and ensure that our community are going to be the first in line and are going to benefit from these dollars that we're contributing, that we're giving. It's because of the property taxes we're paying that these funds exist. So we should be able to ensure the reinvestment to our community.
Okay. You know what? We're getting close to 2:30. I'm wondering if I can get about 15 minutes of your time extra. There are a few questions more that I'd like to ask, and this conversation is very, very interesting, and I think you have a lot to share. So is it okay if we go a little bit over, about 15 minutes?
Sure. Yes.
Nice. Okay, great. Thank you. Cecile, in your experience working with BT and other communities around the city, what do you see as the pros and cons for the TIFs as they're implemented in Chicago, and specifically in the 27th Ward and in Humboldt Park?
Yes. One of the cons towards the TIF development that the story that Carroll has shared is explaining is that sometimes there's a lack of direct benefit, and that comes from a combination of things. It can come from the leadership from the elected official that is over that TIF, or it can come from the fact that there's just no place for community residents to be able to share what they feel the TIF could be used for, or even having a needs analysis that's very real to what a community is experiencing in order to direct those funds. So that's something that we have explained in the story of the work that we've done here in Chicago Central Park, but it's also the story of a lot of other low-income communities where TIF exists, where there's a need and the connection of how the TIF is being used is not really connecting the need to those funds available, right? One of the pros to the TIFs is that for many communities, the TIF fund is the only available funds a community could sometimes have access to, right? So when it comes to trying to create any anchor institutions that would bring economic development, there is no incentive for them to come to that community. So if community residents and local elected officials could coordinate development better with TIF funds, you can see some more improved job creation and job development, as well as some of those other multi-layer facets around how an economic development project can bring other long-standing commitments from other organizations or other businesses, as well as just the impact of construction and things like that, how they can be beneficial to residents. We have to think better around those things, and it takes community residents sometimes putting their elected officials' feet to the fire to have that more thoughtful planning process.
Sure. So, Carroll, the Chicago Central Park TIF was underestimated back in 2011, and residents worked with the City Department of Planning and Development to reallocate funds to a community-informed budget line. Some of the items included things like increasing funds for job training and daycare services. How did you guys find out that the TIF was underestimated, and what did you do to convince the city to reallocate the funds? As you know, in the city of Chicago, this rarely happens, particularly rarely happens in terms of benefiting the community. Usually if there's some reallocation, the reallocation usually favors either the city or developer. So what were some of your secrets?
Well, I think the main secret was just having an informed community, because this was like 3 years into our campaign. This is our 8th year in our campaign. And like I said before, it wasn't that we had to ask for anything, because of the ongoing relationship we developed in constantly having those conversations around the annual TIF, looking at making sure that every year we studied that budget and that we understood where the money was going and who was benefiting from it. So it was because of those ongoing relationships with the Department of Planning, doing those yearly state of the TIF assemblies with the community, and the Department of Planning realized that the Chicago Central Park TIF had been grossly under budgeted what they thought that it was going to make. It already, in year 10, it had already gone like 20 times over what the projected amount was. So because we have been working closely, we realized that, and because the community was educated on how to follow the money. That's what we call it. You follow the money, the story unfolds. So,
yes.
So and that was the case. So that we were able to look at how much money was actually there, how much money had been projected originally. So then we started looking at job training, because our communities, for so long, the West Humboldt Park communities had such a high unemployment rate. I think it's over 20% unemployment, and in some areas it goes over 36% unemployment within the Chicago Central Park TIF, that one of our main priorities was making sure that there was access to job training and hard skill training, right, not the soft skills, job training that led to employment. And then also we saw that actually today none of the child care money has still been used within the Chicago Central Park TIF. So that's one of our current challenges, is how do we work to redefine how that money is dispersed and used for child care, because currently it can only be used within corporations that offer that offer child care and that will offer the employment. So, which lends to these bigger organizations, right, that can provide that. We're trying to see how can we include home-based daycare centers and
awesome.
different entities and agencies within the community that can partner up and be able to provide that. Part of this is allowing yourself and your community to think unrestricted, right? It's your money, and it's not about asking them or begging them. It's about telling them what we need, and it's about inserting our position of power as investors. This is our money, and we have to remember that. I think one of the tools we used was really understanding how it maneuvered and understanding the state law, and really knowing that there's the practice and then there's the law, and they don't always coincide. So not limiting yourself.
Chicago, right?
Right. So for us as a community, is not limiting ourselves to what we think is winnable, but what we think needs to be done.
Oh, I think
that's how we've been able to establish a relationship of equals with the Department of Planning. They know that they can't come with us with a lot of BS because our community is educated.
Oh, that is just beautiful. So I just want to ask one more question before we open it up again to callers. And this question is for both Cecile and Carroll, and I guess we'll take Cecile first. What 3 lessons learned or words of advice would you leave with our listeners?
My first one would be when you're taking on
Cecile?
I'm sorry, when you're taking on an issue or a campaign or initiative, that you want to do the research and learn the policy and the systems with the residents to kind of increase their involvement and understanding, because they're going to be the backbone of the campaign. And as long as they have been able to be shocked with the numbers just like you are, the more invested they are to being able to work on the campaign, right? And that's for our housing work and our education work. And we really allowed, I love that in this campaign we allowed the money to speak to us about the story that was happening, right? And that helped us to think about what are some of the policies that need to be changed, the practices that need to be changed once we let that story kind of unfold through the numbers. The third piece is to be prepared for a lot of long suffering. So this campaign was a long-term campaign, and, you know, a lot of times I remember us sitting back and thinking like, well, you know, are we really moving, and how are we moving, and things like that. And it's okay to have those questions, and it's okay to be committed to a project.
More suffering.
Yeah, exactly. And I said it's both. It's long and it's suffering, but it's okay, you know. That's how change happens, right?
Right. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so we've got your 3 lessons learned, and how about you, Carroll?
For me, like Cecile said, because our campaigns are long, you know, a lot of campaigns are like after 8 years you're still doing it. One of the main things for a lesson for me was really understanding the difference between community buy-in and community ownership.
Wow.
I think we've been able to sustain this campaign and be so long because it's not me having to agitate anybody, because I hadn't had to sign anybody or go door to door and convince people to join this campaign. This is a campaign that's really owned by the community, the vision, the goals, and me and Cecile serve more as resources on how to actually, take our vision and make it happen. So for me, that's really at the core when change needs to happen, is the community needs to be behind it. It needs to be their vision and not selling somebody else's vision. And I think that's what we've been able to sustain for so long and continue in this fight. And understanding that what we're doing needs to be done, and not limiting ourselves. Like I said, could this be done? But knowing that the power lies within us and not looking as power structures as something outside of us. When we do our power analysis, we start always within us, because we're the ones that can make that change happen. And if things are not at the point where we can move them, then how do we change those policies to make sure that those laws are benefiting our community? And I think
I love it.
Working with the facts always, and I think this is one of the lessons I heard from you the first town hall. You don't need to lie. The reality is ugly enough. Working with the facts and the truth always. And people with education, there's no need for agitation. The truth is scary enough.
Wow, how quickly I forgot. I don't see how, but thanks for reminding me. Okay, so is that it? If so, I can open it up to questions. Okay, and I thank you guys so much.
Thank you for having us.
Not a problem. I've got a caller whose number is 469-2189. Do you have a question?
Yes, I wondered, when big corporations are downtown and then you hear that they've gotten so many hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars from the TIF, why is it that community organizations have to plan for so many years to get the funding, but they can come into the community or downtown and someone can just do a carte blanche and give them what they need? I never hear about they had to do community meetings where the community had to be on board. So I'm just wondering, this is what my main question. If you have a project and you go to the alderman and you say, this is my project and this is what I would like to do, what is if the alderman says, okay, that's a great project and I'm behind it, what is the length of time that it would take to get that project funded?
It depends. There's two different there's two different application processes. The streamlined application process is the faster one. However, the way the money is dispersed, and this is one of the challenges we're facing now with using PB with TIF dollars, that the practice for the Department of Planning is that you have to have the money up front and then you get reimbursed. We're trying to change that because that's the practice, and that ensures that people with money are the ones that are able to access. We know that TIFs were really started as a slush fund for the mayors, that we'd like to say for the mayor's homie. So it was a way of doing political payback and kind of managing, and that was the way that they were able to hold back to get the votes they needed with the aldermen, right? So we know that it's been used as a political leverage. We know that the way that it's been dispersed is unequal and unfair because right now it's more used as corporate welfare than as a tool for economic development. Knowing all those things, that's what we make sure that we wanted to ensure, because it's robbing and it's diverting all this money from the Chicago Public Schools, the police department, the fire department, everywhere that they're saying that we are broke and we're bleeding dry, right? This is what we need to make sure that that the TIF is really used for what it was intended to be used, and not as a political slush fund to gain leverage over all the aldermen, to gain leverage over yours. For how long?
How long do you think that would take? How long do you think it would take to get a project off the ground?
Well, it depends on your alderman and if you have the money ready. If you have the money to put for your project, it could take less than 6 months, a couple of months to 6 months. It depends how connected you are politically.
Okay. I got you. We've got time for one more question. We only got a little bit more than 2 minutes left, so I'm going to take one more question and then we're going to have to wrap it up. So there's a caller whose number is 624-4112. Are you still on the line? Did you have a question?
Yes. Hi, Valerie. This is Brenda Palms-Barber. And
Hi,
I just wanted to say to you and to your guests, this has been such a demystifying conversation for me. Thank you all for the work that you're doing around helping us understand the need for transparency around TIFs. I really just wanted to make a comment, Valerie, not so much a question, because I think they've answered a lot of the questions that I've had. I just wanted to say that, when you describe the TIFs as being for those who have money, right, having money up front first, it just sort of struck me that this really is just another form of modern-day slavery. And that when people are not able to access these funds, when there isn't that kind of transparency, it does make you want to rise up and we should rise up and do what you all are doing. I think you're setting great examples of how it's important for us to rise up and give voice and make sure that we hold our officials accountable and that there's even distribution of these funds. And you particularly touched me when you talked about the importance of holding these corporations or whomever, nonprofits as well, accountable for projects and hire individuals that have had a brush with the law. I mean, if you've served your time, then you have served your time. And it's an opportunity for folks to reintegrate back into society. So I just wanted to lift you up and to encourage you, because one of the things I had the pleasure of being Valerie's guest on her inaugural blog radio program on Nonprofit U.
Yes.
And it was really important that, one of my lessons was similar to yours, is that, everything takes longer than you ever think it will. But I appreciate the suffering part of it, because that's part of it too. So, Valerie, just want to say congratulations on another wonderful program, and, and kudos and support to Carolina and Cecile. You guys are amazing women doing good work.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm going to have to wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening to Nonprofit U Blog Radio Talk Show. Be sure to tune in next week at blogtalkradio.com/nonprofit_U. The show will be available for download within about an hour. Be sure to tune in next week when our guest will be Eric Weinheimer, President and CEO of the Donors Forum. Until next week, take care. Bye-bye. Hey, ladies. Thank you. Hello. No, they were in their office and I'm here. Okay. Oh, wasn't that wonderful? Oh. Right.
Right now, save 50 to 70% off at Banana Republic factory stores and online. And 60% off absolutely everything at Gap factory stores. Save even more with 40% off clearance at Gap factory stores. And at Banana Republic factory, all flannel shirts $19.99 and doorbuster scarves $9.99. This weekend only. Search our store locator for your nearest Gap factory and Banana Republic factory store, or shop us online. Right now, save 50 to 70% off at Banana Republic factory stores and online. And 60% off absolutely everything at Gap factory stores. Save even more with 40% off clearance at Gap factory stores. And at Banana Republic Factory, all flannel shirts $19.99 and doorbuster scarves $9.99. This weekend only. Search our store locator for your nearest Gap factory and Banana Republic factory store or shop us online.